right, we're alive, and everybody be on your best possible behavior. We have somebody of esteem in the room here. Dr. Sohom Das, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Can I just say what an honor it is to be amongst such famous YouTubers? As a baby YouTuber myself, I feel that I'm amongst esteemed company. So thank you guys for
oh my! Me. Oh, we're off to a stunning start.
Yes,
God.
we are.
Too much pressure.
Well, we brought Dr. Das, of course, to diagnose Spidey and try to figure out what exactly is wrong with him. I'm just kidding. We are looking at the man of the week, if you will. Kind of glad, though, we've been delayed. I was trying to do this last week, but I really like the fact that we're talking about somebody that we should not see outside of bars for the rest of our lives, at least, and maybe a few more. I mean, what are we looking at? 600 years, 900 years?
I believe the last count I had was 6 consecutive life sentences, and I believe about 800 years for all the different charges. That's the max that he can get.
So he's probably going to stay in for a while.
Fair.
But then again, I don't know. The way some of these governors go by, it's like, oh, you never know. There could be something 30 years down the road. God only knows. But to get things off, starting it well, it's dinner time here, and I have a sponsor. This video is being sponsored by HelloFresh. You've probably heard of them as they are America's #1 meal kit. They offer over 50 weekly options, giving an amazing amount of variety of recipes so you'll never get bored. They even have veggie, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome meals to make it easy to stick to your goals. With HelloFresh, step-by-step recipes are super easy to follow, and pre-portioned ingredients help cut out the prep time. It's also up to 72% cheaper than dining at a restaurant, according to Zagat. To try HelloFresh, just click the link below and you'll get 17 free meals across 7 boxes, plus 3 surprise gifts. Thank you very much, and thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. All right.
We're so back. Soothing. Your voice on that was so soothing. That was so nice.
It was.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Rob, you had a thought about my sponsor today?
I was thinking, in the category of meals that Darrell Brooks will never enjoy in the rest of his life. Welcome to HelloFresh.
Oh, God. We're not laughing at him. We're laughing with him. Just kidding. No, we're laughing at him.
We are laughing at him, okay?
Definitely.
Yes, we are. We are. All right. Oh, goodness gracious. You know what? We're going to go all over the place. I thought I would start with a little piece of video with his closing argument. And I love this because it goes, to me, right into statement analysis. I think Spidey will definitely agree here with, statement analysis. Spidey, would you agree statement analysis a lot of times is what is not being said versus what's actually being said?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a part that he tried to make some hay with this earlier on and was fighting on the last day, trying to call for, I think it's called a Brady violation.
Yeah, he was fighting for a Brady violation, which is complete bogus, essentially arguing that the information was exculpatory and should have been turned over to him, and therefore he should be acquitted.
Right. Which, he was trying everything, and it was always about procedure. So I'm going to play this quick segment here, and it gives us just a feeling of his personality and what was going on. And he was actually on good behavior at this point.
Relatively, yeah.
Attempting to alert people of their presence. Which brings me to more information that I believe that you should have been privy to. And I'm sure that the prosecution will beg to differ. But the fact of the matter is, the vehicle in question, make a model of 2010 Ford Escape. The vehicle in question actually 2008, 2009, and 2010 of that model was in fact recalled.
Objection, misstatement of the facts, facts not in evidence.
Was in
Improper
fact-
argument, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Was in fact recalled. Was in fact a class action lawsuit against Ford
Objection.
for those
facts not in
model
evidence,
for
Your
those
Honor.
model vehicles.
Sustained. The juror will disregard.
Information that you should have been privy to.
He really listens very well to the judge. And anybody notice that? You know, objection sustained, blah, 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 keeps going. Where I'm going with this, because it continues. Everything with Darrell Brooks was fascinating. I feel like, because I did not have the opportunity to watch the whole trial, Alita covered a whole lot more of it. But every time I
only
checked
covered
in,
like the last day of it. So
I-
there were
oh, really?
plenty of
watched-
people who covered a lot more than
Yeah.
me.
I watched almost every waking minute of this thing because this guy fascinated me.
all right, well, he aggravated me, but correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like I didn't miss anything because every time I went to watch again, I was seeing the same exact behavior, the same statements over and over and over to the nth degree. Why I brought this up for statement analysis, Spidey, and you probably have already figured it out. What was he not actually saying in that bit?
In that bit or in the trial overall?
Oh, but both. But right
They
there,
both apply.
especially, yeah. He's talking about a recall. He's recalled the vehicle.
Yep.
He never once said, my vehicle lost control. I tried to
Oh,
stop.
okay,
I
I
hit
assume-
the brake. I
Okay,
turned the
so
lights. I did
I
that.
assume he
Never.
got there eventually, or that he had prefaced it with that. Did he never say that?
No,
No.
never once. He talked about the recall. He talked about these facts and this is evidence. And he
tried to
never
suggest
once
it.
said the one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong with Spidey, statement analysis is, I didn't do it, or I
Yeah, there's
tried
no
to
denial.
turn.
Absolute denial. Of course. There's a word for that, and it's a non-specific denial. So the authors of Spy the Lie, who were all CIA interrogators and wrote this book about, deceptive tells, they call this a non-specific denial, where it's basically like,
Whoa.
what that is. Who's someone on the spaceship? No.
It's like your magic tricks here, dude. Are you conjuring voodoo now? I mean, good God.
Non-specific denial is like, it masquerades as a denial. It's almost like he's denying, but he never actually gets the denial. And he's talking about this global, the car being called back, but he's never making the link. I assume that he was just going to get to saying, because this is the one part of the trial that I haven't watched, is the closing, except for the clips that you've asked me to look at. I looked at the entire rest of the trial, but closing, because I've been busy over the last couple of days. I had to film with Rob. I kind of neglected to deep dive into that. But yeah, if he never got to actually equating that to saying my car didn't, like, something was wrong with it, then yeah, that's weird.
Now there's a catch-22 there, which doesn't make sense in this context. So he didn't testify, which means that any evidence that from his perspective cannot be seen by the jury. None of his statements. He can't have said to, if he were to get up there and say, the vehicle did this when I was in it, that would have been a violation of every single evidentiary rule because he didn't testify. However, that didn't stop him from violating every other evidentiary rule at every other point of his closing argument. So I think the statement analysis holds great weight there, because if he was following all the rules, he wouldn't be able to say, I didn't drive the vehicle, but he wasn't following all the rules. So for him, it's just fair game.
I'm saying it for me. I'm saying it for me. Like, I'm so happy this guy is going away down the river forever, and no compunction, no guilt, nothing. I can just sit there and just be thrilled. I don't question a single bit of it. He did it. He did it in every way. And I even looked it up further because of his BS statements here. One, he didn't deny it. And he even said, I'm not disputing the facts, as part of his closing, which is an amazing closing. I'm not disputing the facts.
Do you know what the second thing he said, though?
My conscience is clear.
No, so he did this in his opening statement too. And Spidey and I had a big laugh about this one. The first sentence he says, I'm not disputing any of the facts. Second sentence he says, but there are two sides to every story. That's the definition of disputing the facts.
The other thing that strikes me is that he apparently at one point, I'm not sure which point, but at one point he said that he believes the jury will come to the right decision, which to me suggests that at least either he's completely lying or he's completely delusional, or some part of him genuinely believes that he could, win the case or get released or, have mitigating circumstances. It's very odd.
Well, could it also be actually that this is the right decision and he knows the jury will come to it? Like a deep down, like the Susan Smith case, Spidey, or Ted Bundy. I remember reading a book on it. It was shocking about Ted Bundy because when he escaped, right, by jumping out the window of the courthouse in Colorado, where did he go? He went to Florida and continued to spree. He went somewhere where he would actually be executed, where he was in trial for his life. In Utah, in Colorado, in Washington State, all of these, none of them would kill him. He made sure to put himself into a final place where he would be executed. And there was a question whether there was an internal trigger, and this is straight for Dr. Dawes here, to kind of like a conscience sneaking out.
What are you talking about for Ted Bundy specifically, or
even here?
About...
I'm saying, could this be a parallel to where the jury is going to make the right choice, and maybe deep down that this is? There was a point, and I'm saying it too because Alita, I think you were watching. He made this point where he was actually almost human for a minute, and he said to the judge, "Should there be a sentence, I would like to." A guilty conviction, I would like to have time for my family to get my affairs in order and stuff like that. Where he actually, it sort of shocked the judge too. She was like, yeah, that's a pretty fair, reasonable request. Like, it set her back.
But then again, he also asked, like right before the verdict came in, he also asked if they could take the shocks off of his ankle, which seems to indicate he thought that he was going to be going free.
I read that differently.
Yeah, or he might be trying to go free.
I read that very differently.
He might be trying to go free.
I see. I could see. Okay.
Back to Ted Bundy here. Back to Ted Bundy here.
Yep.
That's fair.
In my mind,
try to get like one last once over on the judge. Like, oh hey, maybe I can trick you into letting me out of here. That's fair. I didn't think about that.
The attempt at unaliving via cop. I saw that as a possibility if a guilty verdict come in, but
okay. So
I want to touch really quickly because I'm really I got excited when Dr. Dawes mentioned when he said, the right thing, because he said I what was it? I pray, I hope and I pray that you will do the right thing. So when he was doing that opening statement, we were seeing. And I consulted Eric. I called Scott Rouse. I called Chase Hughes. I wanted to make sure that what I was getting here was in fact correct, because we were seeing the typical eyebrows of sadness. This is Paul Ekman's work. When the eyebrows go downwards like this and the corners come up. This is really hard to fake. This with the eyebrows is really hard to fake. Some actors can do it, but typically the glabella up here and the eyebrows doing this happens in real sadness, and it was happening during his opening statements. And at some point when he said that sentence, I hope and pray you will do the right thing, he looked at them and it spiked. Like in that moment, it hit him really, really hard. I think there's a part of him, and Dr. Dawes, if you disagree, I would love to, because given the diagnosis, this might not hold, but I believe that there's a part of him that knows that the right thing to do when he applies logic, that the right thing would be to convict him for this. Yeah. When he looked at them, he saw that. And I think that's why the sadness hit him. I think a part of him knows that the right thing would be that.
I think the very fact that he said things like there are hurt people on both sides, that he wants the jury to come to the right decision, means that he genuinely believes that he's got a case. I don't think he fully understands what he's done. I think he knows he's physically run over people and he's ended their lives. But I think that even though he might know at a very deep level, I think superficially he thinks that he's got a good outcome of this case potentially.
Well, let me do this, because I had a conversation. I've done this a couple times. The way that he would have wanted to argue this case, and tell me if I'm wrong, because you guys have both Spidey and you, Dr. Dawes, have seen him enough. The way he would have wanted to argue this case if he was so permitted, he would have said, look, I came to town to collect money from my ex-girlfriend. We had it out. She's had it in for me for a long period of time. She escalated a confrontation, and I had to respond by getting more confrontational in that. All of a sudden, cops were called, and I had to get out of there so that I could avoid the circumstance of going to jail because of what she did by escalating this situation. I ended up on a parade route, and I had nowhere else to go, so I didn't have an alternative but to proceed straight through the parade. I honked my horn to try and get people out of the way, but when they didn't leave, the proper thing that I knew that I was going to go to jail, and if I went to jail, I would have been killed or my life would have been taken from me. So I thought that I was justified in mowing people over because it was escaping a situation that my girlfriend caused, and she's the ultimate cause of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty flimsy, isn't it? I think most people would doubt that would actually work. You know, even if he could say that he was provoked into agitation, there's no sort of psychiatric reason there that would have prevented him from knowing what he was doing.
The police were shooting at him at one part of it. So using Rob's scenario, we could say, I was in the middle of it. All of a sudden they were shooting at me. I'm trying to escape the fire of the bullets or whatever. I don't know. It's obvious.
I mean, I was just putting myself in his mind, having watched the interview notes, his engagement with the court, the opening statement, the closing argument. In his mind, at least my belief is that's what he feels. Like that's how he justifies it to himself. He is a victim here because he would not be here if it wasn't for that first confrontation. Like, look at the witnesses he examined. It all went back to that first confrontation.
That could be.
Just to add to that, Rob, it seems like he's fully 100% invested in these beliefs, right? It doesn't feel like he's just trying his best to get away with it. I think Correct. He really doesn't think he's guilty, which is insane. Like that in itself.
Well, that's why you're here. So on that note, does he have actually? I feel like he has a personality disorder versus a mental illness, but yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Okay. So just very quickly for your viewers, the difference between a personality and a mental illness is as follows. So mental illness is like a change of your baseline state where you have active symptoms. Typically.
You muted yourself.
Oh, no, he's muted
yourself.
The most important part. And he goes silent.
Sorry, don't know what happened then. Sorry about that. Particularly in a case where there might be a psychiatric offense, it's usually a psychosis. So something like hearing voices, paranoid delusions. I've assessed cases where people have attacked people violently or even killed because they have these delusions that their life is under threat by that person. A personality disorder is much more kind of a persistent stain. So it's your internal characteristics. It's you, it's your baseline, and it's there all the time in all different scenarios. So I think that this man, Darrell Brooks, almost certainly has antisocial personality disorder. So that is, being aggressive, being impulsive, not having empathy, not caring about the difference between right and wrong. So that I would fairly confidently diagnose that from what I know about him, even before the court case. So, his previous charges, battery, weapons, assaulting police officers, drugs, firearms, like he's a career criminal. But from his behavior during the actual trial, I was saying this before we started recording, I think he's got paranoid personality disorder. So he clearly doesn't trust others, the judge, witnesses, the entire legal system. He is very hypersensitive to criticism. He's really kind of able to, what Rob was saying before, he's got this external locus of control. That's the psychiatric term. So he's unable to accept responsibility for his own actions. It's everybody else's fault, but it's not his. And most importantly, he's hostile, he's stubborn, and he's argumentative, very argumentative. So to me, that is the diagnosis that would most appropriately fit him.
Quick question. I believe in the DSM, they don't actually list psychopathy and sociopathy. Do those fall under antisocial?
Yeah. So antisocial personality disorder is all those things that I said. And then psychopathy is all of those things plus an element of manipulation, an element of charm, and of being parasitic. So you're always kind of leeching off other people or trying to take advantage of other people. And also you have a complete lack of empathy. Whereas an antisocial personality disorder, you can have empathy to a degree. And then sociopathy is like a version of psychopathy, but psychopaths are kind of better at blending in and hiding their personality traits, whereas sociopaths are a lot more kind of reactive and impulsive.
So would he fall into either of those two further definitions, or is he just on the baseline antisocial?
From what I know about him, and forgive me, I've not done as much research as you guys have, but from what I know about him, I don't think he's that charming or manipulative, is he? He's forceful and he's argumentative, but he's not Like, I mean, you mentioned Ted Bundy before, right? He's a prototype psychopath who's actually quite charming and deceitful. I don't think Darrell Brooks is that charming, so I don't think he's a psychopath. No.
You would think, though, Dr. Dawes, that in the way that he speaks, that he expects more sympathy than he actually gets. Like, he talks to the judge in certain ways that would suggest it's worked for him before with other people, maybe with less intelligent people, maybe with, like, I don't know if it's ex-partners, ex-friends, but you said parasitic lifestyle. I have no trouble believing that this guy is a complete leech. I don't know why. I just get that vibe that he owes a lot of people money. I don't know why.
It has worked. Hold on, it has worked for him, Rob. He's what was it? He was currently on bail from jumping bail previously. Wasn't he like a triple bail jumper or something? Where he kept letting him out. So I mean, he's somehow manipulating the system in a way. I don't know if he's manipulating the people.
But he doesn't do it. I don't know that he was manipulating it. He was profiting from. He was directly benefiting and profiting from the system that was put in place. I don't think he did it intentionally. I think he fell into it. Like he got these bail terms and all these different things because that was what the system was geared to try and fix. He just happens to be the extreme example of maybe the system fixed itself and over-adjusted in a certain way, which is why you've scaled back and seen more people asking for cash bail to come back on the table and different stuff like that. On the topic of him thinking he's more persuasive than he is, this guy put a music video out that was rather graphic and rather terrible. I mean, he threw it out on his social media. He had video clips of him, and I shared it with Spidey of was it him just going off and talking about how the girl that he was with, yes, she was 16 when she got with him because she told him he was 18, and all of a sudden she's pregnant, and that justifies his behavior.
Well, he did that in court.
Yeah. Listen, the amount at which I'm seeing this kind of delusional expectancy, like when he talks to people, because we all looked at it and went like, does any part of him expect this to work? But the fact that he went this long not realizing that it doesn't work, to me indicates that maybe in certain circumstances this did work. Like he did pull this off successfully on people. I'm thinking about the moment where he was talking to the judge about he said, one of the witnesses tomorrow, I want to do such and such with one of the witnesses, and I might have, take longer with them and bring them in a little later. And the judge was like, okay, well, can you tell me who it is? And he's being all coy and like he's being trying to play fun with it, and he's smiling. He's like, what if I don't want to tell you? And it's like, is this really the time? You're on trial for having killed 6 people. Can you take the judge seriously, please? And Rob and I, we need to take breaks when we're filming that. I don't know if you all saw that. Doc, see that?
There was another part too, Spidey, where a witness said, he goes, did you see the vehicle? And the witness said, and you didn't see him during the time, but the witness said, yeah, it was smashed to shit. And he laughed.
Yeah, like there are these moments where he's like trying to be playful and fun. And I look at it and I go, he's had people in his life who allowed this to work. It's the only reason I can explain that he's in front of adults and he's behaving this way.
So I'll tell you what I think, Spidey. So I think you're probably right. I think in the past he's been able to manipulate or control some people, probably through intimidation. He's a pretty scary guy and he's got a long criminal record. However, going back to what we were talking about before, I don't think he's a psychopath, and I'll explain why. Because a psychopath is so good at manipulating people, they're able to change their behavior and presentation. And people generally like psychopaths before they realize they're psychopaths, right?
What about sociopaths?
So sociopaths are kind of somewhere in between what we're talking about, antisocial and psychopaths, but they're still very manipulative. So the reason that I don't think that Brooks is a psychopath is because he would have known that his behavior is pissing off the judge and is not helping him, not helping his case. A true psychopath would be clever enough to they're like comedians. They can slide in and change their presentation, change their arguments, change the tone of their voice.
Sure.
A true psychopath would figure out how to get the judge on his side. Whereas it seems like Darrell Brooks is doing the opposite of that. He's
back to Bundy
without even realizing it.
Back to Bundy. At the end, the judge said, "You're an amazing young man. I am so sorry you didn't go down another path in your life. You've done I don't remember all of it, but he was saying,
you could have been a great lawyer.
Yeah, you could have been a great lawyer. You did a wonderful job, and I sentenced you to die." But it was a crazy juxtaposition, but the judge genuinely liked him. And so, yeah, I never thought he was a psychopath. I was just questioning if he could slide into the sociopathy realm, because the sociopathy, from what I've understood, is somebody who's turned into a quasi psychopath through being institutionalized, like being in prison, being beat up, being in gang, like definitely a nurture over nature type of condition. But correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know this stuff.
Yeah, sociopaths are like diet psychopaths, I'd say. So they have.
I'm going to write that down. I have to write that down.
Psychopath 0.
As long as you quote me every time you use it, Rob. They are, yeah. So you're right. They're more about nature. They're more about nurture than they are nature. So they're kind of built through childhood experiences. Psychopaths are as well, but sociopaths more so. But I don't know. This guy, this Darrell Brooks, he's not. He's got the antisocial aspect, but to me, he doesn't have the charm and manipulation aspects to even be a sociopath. Because the very fact that, right, let's put it this way, all 5 of us dislike the guy openly. Right?
Oh, yes.
True, yeah.
If he was a psychopath, we'd at least, he's killed 6 people, but we'd at least sympathize with some aspects of him or understand his point of view.
Or find him fascinating or find him interesting even. Like even if we didn't like him, he would be captivating or interesting or fascinating in some ways, where this guy just, I want to punch him. I'm spending so much time wanting to punch him. And I think most people do. It's like, stop. I mean, it is infuriating. Part of the reason I haven't been able to watch as much as A, I don't have time, and B, I can only tolerate it for so long, the way he kept going over and over. I want to actually, this is a good clip, I think, that goes into a little bit of his reacting about his girlfriend, etc.
Oh no. Yeah.
Hold on. Before we look at this, because I'm like, this is going to open up a whole nother can of
That's
worms.
the idea.
I just have 2 quick questions for Dr. Rouse.
Sure.
Okay, 1, what happens if a psychopath is actually an idiot?
It's a fair question.
Yeah. Well, right. So psychopaths are generally very socially intelligent as opposed to cognitively intelligent, right? So I suppose I've worked with psychopaths. I've diagnosed people formally with psychopaths. I've never met one personally that would be what you call an idiot, so would have a low IQ. But I suppose theoretically, as long as they were really crafty enough to still manipulate and exploit people, then I suppose that could exist as an entity. So they probably get caught a bit easier because they wouldn't be able to cover their tracks as well as an intelligent psychopath. But yeah, it's possible for one of those to exist.
Because you're going, he would have been able to gauge that his shtick isn't working and he would have to adjust. And I'm just sitting there going, what if he's just dumb? But you're right. Like anybody would know that this confrontation, you got to shift gears, especially a psychopath, because from what I've learned is that they have cold empathy as opposed to warm empathy, but they still have that capacity to know what you're experiencing. They just may not be able to experience it themselves. So
but they're clever enough to fake it, and that's the ultimate thing,
Exactly.
which Darrell Brooks is not doing, I think.
Well, maybe that gets into the sociopath versus psychopath again.
No,
The dumber ones might. No, I'm talking about the dumb psychopath. It's almost contrary, because they have to have enough to fit in or pick it up. But thank you, Scott Cardinal, who also works with Rob on Trials of the Century. By the way, this is a trial of the century you guys should consider. Ted Bundy.
Can't. I need at least a century to revisit this trial.
No, not the current one. I'm talking about Ted Bundy.
Oh, Ted Bundy? Yeah, that's a pretty good trial. This creepy ending of it is.
I would live stream that trial on Classic Trials.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, yeah. And I found him cross-examining himself. So, I mean, that right there is just something that I've got to pull up and see if I can cover. But okay, let's go to the
second question really quick, Dr. Dawes, really quick. I'm just let me nerd out over psychobabble here, okay? Dr. Dawes, what do you make of his decision to represent himself? Do you see it as an extension or as evidence towards the sort of paranoia, like nobody else can do this for me because everyone else is against me, I'm the only one who can do this?
Yeah.
Maybe borderline, maybe Messiah complex, or no?
Right. So in my so I work as an expert witness, right? So I assess mentally disordered offenders during criminal trials, and in my experience, when people represent themselves, they're either fucking psychotic, like completely insane, delusional, and do a terrible job, and they probably shouldn't actually be fit to plead. And I've even seen cases where they've started and then the judge has asked for a psychiatric assessment because they don't appear fit to plead, or they're hugely narcissistic. So to the point that they love attention so much that they would rather, even if they don't care if they can do a good job of representing themselves, they just want to be center of stage. Most people fall into those two categories. I think Darrell Brooks is neither of those two things.
Agreed.
I think he is pretty much what you said. I think that he is quite sort of, I think it's a couple of things. He's got this really anti-authoritarian kind of stance. So as you'll know, he calls himself the sovereign citizen. So I think part of it is him not respecting the legal system as a whole, and therefore he doesn't want anyone else to represent him, number one. And number two, going back to what we were saying before, I think he's also quite paranoid. So I think that he probably thinks that anybody that's representing him will not have his best interests at heart. So yeah, that's why.
And let me give you an example on the ground. Imagine if you're an attorney representing Darrell Brooks and you have to have a conversation with him.
No.
Imagine that you are. Imagine you're an attorney in that room and you have a conversation with him based on what we've seen in his behavior. You have to have a conversation with him about how and why you are unable to have a question asked of a certain witness and having to relay to him, no, Mr. Brooks, I cannot ask that question. How do you imagine that someone like that would respond?
You're fired.
I'll do it myself. You're
not
cheating
doing your
me.
job.
You're hiding this from me. You're trying to get me convicted.
You're working with a
Also,
judge. You're
on a slightly different angle, how about the conversation where the attorneys sit down with him and say, this is the reality of what you are looking at in this case. You are going to be convicted no matter what, because there is video of you. We have to be absolutely real with what you should expect from this trial and what we can do for you. And then he says, I can't trust you. I can't, like, you're not doing your best for me. You're throwing this case. Are you connected to the judge? Are you connected to the prosecution? Like, you're in it for me. Like who's paying you? You know, like I can totally see all of those thoughts coming out then after that kind of a conversation as well.
Okay, I'm gonna play my. Buddy's gonna watch the clip. If it kills him,
let's go.
Should not be admissible. One, because of a discovery violation. We've never seen this before. Two, because we have reason to believe that he did not get
Sorry.
from Eric Patterson. He is on a jail phone call talking to his mother, Dawn Woods, about Dawn Woods sending these photographs to him. Now,
That's a lie. I object to
Let
that.
the state make their argument without interruption, sir.
That's a lie, though.
three, I believe that these photographs are designed to make a suggestion to the jury that Erica Patterson is a bad mom. I think that is what the defendant is trying to do. And if we're going to go down that road, then we would be forced to counter that claim. First of all, it doesn't make her an incredible witness, if it's even true. And second of all, if we go down that road, we would be forced to counter that claim by pointing out that not only does the defendant not live with the child in question, he doesn't live with any of the other children that he has. He impregnated Erica Patterson when she was a minor in Nevada. And for doing so, he was convicted of statutory sexual seduction, pled guilty in March of 2007 to that felony offense, and is a sex offender on the registry as a result. So if there's any causation that would lead to Erica Patterson being a bad mom, Mr. Brooks has a direct role in that causation.
And that's
Furthermore,
I object to that.
I'm not
because
done.
that's a lie.
Let
Because
him
at the end
finish.
of the day,
Let him
if we
finish,
don't open the door
Mr.
on that, no,
Brooks.
since he want to make a record and not be accurate, so let's be accurate all on the record since you think you know so much.
Once
So
again,
we can
Mr.
open the
Brooks
door
is
on.
being
We can open the door on how old she told me
disrespectful,
she was. when we met.
interrupting.
Volume's
and
getting better.
He is over the top.
Got better real fast.
Mr. Brooks, I'm ordering you to sit down and to let the
No,
state finish.
no, I'm not going to sit here and let somebody be inaccurate on the record and lie on the
All
record.
right. Under Illinois versus Allen, I've warned him repeatedly. He's being removed from the courtroom. And you know what? Let me dial that back. We're just going to take an early lunch, 1 hour. We'll be back. And unless he brings that letter and he can show it is inadmissible, she will not be questioned. And under 906.11, I will declare the cross-examination closed. Thank you. We're in recess, 1 hour.
Get your facts straight. So let's open the door on all of it then.
I'm sorry. I thought that was an excellent clip, really showing his behavior. Hopefully for Dr. Das too, the escalation of his response, which I think everybody agrees not really appropriate for the courtroom in front of a judge. I mean, I'd be terrified if I had to say anything in front of a judge. That judge can put me away forever or lock me into the basement of the courthouse.
So what I was thinking when I saw that was, again, for my work, when I assess defendants, some of them are hostile, nasty, antisocial pieces of work that have done quite horrific things. But almost all of them are on their best behavior when I assess them, because they know that I'm writing a report that the judge is going to see. And similarly, when they're in the courtroom, most of the time they're on their best behavior. They get occasional outbursts when somebody gets annoyed, and then their barrister, your equivalent of a lawyer, would shush them and they'll be quiet. I've never seen a case where somebody's been that kind of consistently argumentative and hostile for such a prolonged period of time.
To be fair, the judge, not to say the judge invited it, but the judge didn't shut it down early enough. Like, it's like, I think that if the judge had you advising her on how to handle a person of this character and demeanor, you would have said, no, you need to stop it immediately. You need to stop it when it first starts. You can't allow the behavior to begin. It's like training someone it's trained behavioral response. Yeah. But by allowing it to go once, you have now trained that he can do it and he can get a reaction from it. And he did it more, and you saw it escalate and escalate and escalate to the point where this 5'8", 140-pound soaking wet pipsqueak gets up in a courtroom and starts making threatening gestures towards the prosecutor's table and the judge. I mean,
you know what? I'm going to play a quieter clip. Watch his eyes.
It's a death stare if I've ever seen one.
The dude
I would get
doesn't
sanctioned.
blink.
I would get sanctioned for looking at a judge like that.
Yeah.
No, look, it's still going.
Thank you,
When's the last time
everyone.
you
Please be
blinked?
seated. Statement
He hasn't
continuance examination of
No.
this witness. I believe we're on
Look,
exhibit
look, keep
117.
watching, keep watching.
Yes, we have one.
He still hasn't
Madam
blinked.
Clerk, would you please turn the display back on?
And he was the last to sit, trying to exert authority.
Yeah.
Just
Look at that. He still hasn't blinked.
God, that's so
Johnson,
aggressive.
were there other items on the front passenger seat besides the blue winter hat?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Okay, and I want Dr. Doss to see this, because this is a very specific behavior and highly unusual. I mean, we're talking a 90 seconds or better, no blinking, complete. What would you think of that? Or
Well, the first thing is, like, are his eyes not getting dry? I don't know if I can actually maybe get some like drops in afterwards. So yeah, I mean, he's just got this huge kind of level of disrespect and just kind of rage and aggression that's coming out here. This doesn't feel like a surly teenager that's trying to make a point during his trial. It seems like, I think it comes back to paranoia to me. I think he genuinely feels wronged. I think that he thinks that, you know, all the weird sort of legal aspects he's bringing up before. Did somebody mention the Brady exception earlier?
Yeah,
Which is completely irrelevant to the particular legal scenario. So I think he's actually completely invested in these ideas. He really thinks that he's being wronged and the judge is getting it wrong, and that the judge has it out for him. He doesn't think that he's getting a fair trial. So all of this, again, sort of strengthens my diagnosis of paranoid personality disorder, I think. It's possible that he's actually psychotic, so that's slightly different in that he's having like actual delusional beliefs, but they tend to be quite bizarre. And what he's saying is, it's not correct, but it's at least feasible. Like, it's in the right sort of ballpark. Do you know what I mean? So he's not saying that it's, you know, aliens controlling him, et cetera, which is what I see when people have actual delusions. So yeah, I think he's just got this intense level of paranoia, like beyond what I usually see in my clinical practice.
when I saw that, it made me think of The Sopranos. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. Great show. But one of the characters in The Sopranos is just a psycho guy, and Gandolfini looks at him. He's glaring at Gandolfini, and Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, looks at the guy and said, "Yeah, don't look at me with those Manson lamps." And I just loved that line. But that kind of reminded me now that that wasn't the only time he did it. He actually did it again later, and the judge said, "I am scared."
It's because that was the slamming the table one.
He slammed the table and he did that, and then she was scared. Here's another fun interaction.
Judge of the law. That's why I have all of these jury instructions to give to the jury.
I'm not referring to subject matter jurisdiction.
What are you referring to then? Be very specific so I can make a finding and ruling.
I was specific. My other filings.
That's not specific enough, sir. What are you
My
referring
court
to?
docket
Which
sheet.
filing?
Let me know when you're done, Your Honor.
Which filing, sir?
Oh, you.
Not generally, but specifically.
Are you done?
Oh, no one can say that to a judge. I'm sorry.
I just the punchable nature of his face and voice is something I cannot quite
That's
express.
very rude and
I
disrespectful.
didn't know if you was finna say something.
I
That's why I'm
paused.
asking. Are you?
See, and he
finished?
does that little back off.
What
Your
filing
Honor,
are
how
you
come
referring
every
to?
time I try, even when I try to err on the side of caution, you find some way to make it to be something that it's not? I didn't know if you was gonna say something
Woe
else.
is me. Woe is me.
I've asked a question, sir, so when I do that, I would hope it would convey to you I'm looking for an answer. So
Blame the judge for being offended by his
All my
disrespect.
filings, my notice of appearance, my statement of particulars, my bond, the court docket sheet, all of those filings.
Well, you bring up respect, Elite. He's very concerned about respect too.
I believe that
He wants
fully.
respect.
I don't care what you believe fully.
All right.
It's not a game.
We
I don't take this as a game. That's what
Let me
nobody.
explain this to you
That's what
once
nobody.
again.
You don't got to explain nothing to me.
Do you want
That's what you don't understand. You think
you
that
want
this
the
is a whole
opportunity
game
to
to me.
question?
This is not a game to me, Your Honor. Nothing about this is a joke.
I never
That's
said
what
it
y'all
was a
don't
joke.
understand.
But there's
And it's
some things in this
unfair.
ship
It's
that's going on.
unfair and it's disrespectful to me that you think I would come in here purposely and treat this like a joke or a game.
Sit your ass down.
What type of statement is that?
It's based off
Your life
University
is
of
not
my
on the line.
eyeballs.
Mine is. And you think that I think this is funny?
I don't think it's funny whatsoever.
So,
And I
so I
understand.
think, Your Honor, with all due respect, I think you
So
should show
we're
some
gonna take
respect.
a 5-minute break, and when we come back, the jury's coming out, and you need to call your next witness. Thank you. We are in
No,
recess.
you're not rushing me to judgment. I don't care what you're talking about.
You know, he was always looking for the plaintiff in every single case. And he was saying, what's the plaintiff? Where's the plaintiff? And the plaintiff is the state of Wisconsin. And I had a great proposal to demonstrate to Darrell Brooks who the plaintiff was in this case. And that is that every citizen in the state of Wisconsin has an opportunity to show up at the courthouse steps. And Darrell Brooks will stand there for 3 days while every citizen gets to walk up and, having heard all the evidence, they can decide whether to hug him or hit him. And they all get a free shot. And they all get to do it. And that is how we're going to introduce the state of Wisconsin as a body politic to Darrell Brooks.
There'll be a long line, I have a feeling, Rob.
Yeah.
Very long
just
line
ask for
of punches.
volunteers. Just ask
I
for
would
volunteers.
change residency. I would change residency for the opportunity just to take one swing at this guy.
So Rob, I got a question for all of you, actually. You said before that you think the judge should have shut down his behavior earlier. How would you guys have dealt with it as a judge? What would you have done differently?
I would have instructed the bailiffs very early to physically remove him from the courtroom before he starts talking. The second he starts speaking, I would have had the bailiff come in there and take him and physically remove him from the courtroom. And I would have given him a warning before doing that to say that, Mr. Brooks, if you continue down this path, I will have my bailiffs remove you from the courtroom. And I'm telling you right now, I don't want to do that in front of the jury, but you, by your own actions, might trigger that. And that is a consequence that you don't want to see. Those bailiffs were remarkably restrained. And Spidey, I don't know if you caught any of the facial expressions on them during some of the trial. You could tell that they were not pleased that they had to sit back and listen to that without acting.
Sure. Well, they had a shock thing. You know, they're all sitting there saying,
I wanted that.
Come on,
control.
press the button. Press the button. Come on.
You're ready,
Bill, you can press the button. I know. I mean, well, okay. So Dr. Dawes, that's a great question back to you. I had heard one way to deal with somebody that behavior is you give them a choice. You have to say, you are going to do this or this. Choose.
Yeah.
Yes or
So
that, choose.
I think I completely concur with what Rob says. You have to shut it down. You have to make it clear what the options are and what the consequences are really early on and shut it down almost immediately. Even though I think that's the right course of action, I also am 100% convinced that in his mind, in his paranoid mind, it would have just played into
the paranoia.
His perspective of being mistreated and of everything being unfair and this conspiracy behind it. With true paranoia, there's very little you can do to argue against it, to be honest with you. So he's going to feel that whatever you do.
So, I mean, okay, let's ask the general question on that then. He has all these conditions. Does he belong in an institution or a prison?
Prison.
Yeah. So basically, for somebody to end up in a psychiatric unit, like a secure unit for offenders, they have to reach the threshold for a psychiatric defense. So in the UK where I'm based, it'd be like not guilty of by reason of insanity, or because it's murder, it'd be diminished responsibility. So I won't go through the medico-legal criteria because it'll send us all to sleep. And I know that it's half 2 in the morning for Alita. But the crux of the matter is, did they know what they were doing, and did they know that it was wrong? Right. So I think even though Darrell Brooks is absolutely paranoid, is really argumentative, has all these weird character traits and possibly even slightly delusional beliefs, if he intentionally ran over those people, notwithstanding what he's saying about being shot at by the police, which I don't think anyone's buying, if he ran over those people for whatever reason, hateful reason, racist reasons, then he did know what he was doing, right? So I don't think he'd have met that criteria. So he should go to prison. Maybe he should have some psychiatric treatment in prison, antipsychotics therapy to help with his paranoia. That's a different kind of topic, but definitely within prison rather than hospital.
Yeah, but correct me if I'm wrong, but with personality disorders, isn't it basically that any forced psychiatric treatment is not going to stick or do anything at all? They have to will it, and they have to voluntarily submit themselves to the therapy. Not only that, they have to buy it as you're selling it to them, actually, not just pretend to buy it. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the people with, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the reasons why a lot of people with personality disorders, they never actually address them. They pretend to address them, and they demonstrate they're going through the steps, but they never actually believe it or buy it. So they never actually correct themselves.
Yeah. So a couple of things I'd say there. So with personality disorders, medication you can't reverse a personality disorder with any kind of medication. And you can, in theory, with like psychotic disorders, you can medicate people against their will under the Mental Health Act in psychiatric units, not in prison, but in psychiatric units with mental illnesses. With personality disorders, you have to give therapy. And as you say, Rob, people have to engage. They have to sort of show motivation and willingness. As to whether they can ever get better, that's a bit of a contentious issue. But from my clinical experience, some people can improve. But number one, it needs an internal epiphany from themselves. So they have to want to change. And often it's because they go through, I'm not talking about Darrell Brooks, but in other cases that I've seen, they go through this cycle of being arrested, of acting violently, of losing friends, of losing communication with family. So it's because their life has been damaged over and over again that they actually want to change. So it's usually quite a bit later on in life. And they have to, and it takes a long time. That's the other thing I was going to say. So it's not, you're literally talking about changing people's personality structures and re-socializing them. So it takes months, if not years. And sometimes there's relapses. So they seem to be better for months, and then whatever, they have an argument or a run-in confrontation, then they get worse. So it's a very complicated process. But yes, in theory, some people do improve.
I have a question. So what about the fact that there were cameras in the courtroom? He knew that it was being televised. And how does that potentially impact the level of his behavior? Because it seems like it got more and more outrageous as the trial went on. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that was my impression. I wasn't following it as closely as, say, Rob was from the beginning. But that was the impression that I had. Could that have impacted, I don't know, some of his behavior, the fact that he knew that it was being recorded, for example?
That's a good question. At the end of the day, to piggyback back on that, in his cell, could he have been watching the day's coverage or the day's news about the stunt that he did in the courtroom?
No, I don't think he's given access to that. He has access to very, very locked down computers that allow him to do legal research and word processing, but it doesn't allow him a free reign to the internet.
No, television. I'm talking about nightly news, like the television in the cell block. If there's a cell block, because that he was probably featured today's testimony because he's local. Would he possibly been getting off watching his own stunts being played back on television? So
possible. Like Spidey's asked me this. Other people have asked me this. What is the record he's referring to? He keeps saying, for the record, the record, the record, the record, the record.
On the record.
The record in his mind, it just based on watching his observations, is the camera. It's the camera, which is why he's so focused on whether the audio is rolling before he starts talking. When the judge begins the court day, everyone steps in, and the judge's mic is the first one to go hot. And the judge says the appearance of the parties as they were before, and they say, please note your appearance and introduce yourself for the record. And Mr. Brooks almost every single day would ask if the audio was working yet before he started speaking. So for him, the record was this magical being that just recorded anything and everything that took place in that courtroom, which in part was the cameras.
Oh, and he also was concerned about being muted, but I got way ahead. Dr. Das, back to Alita's question. My follow-up.
Yeah, I think, to me, from what I've seen, and I don't profess to have seen all the available footage, it doesn't feel like he is doing this because he wants to be the center of attention. He doesn't seem like somebody, but he's narcissistic to a degree in that he speaks over people and he's quite arrogant and he believes that what he's saying is correct. But he doesn't seem like a show-off kind of narcissist or a histrionic kind of person. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, to me, he wants to, he's raising his voice and he's arguing because he genuinely believes that he's being wronged. So again, it comes back to paranoia rather than histrionics and narcissism to me. So I think the cameras being in the courtroom are important because he believes that that he's right and that other people need to listen to him to be on his side, which is obviously
someone outside the courtroom will see it and side with him. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. That's what I think. I think he's trying to align himself with other people because he believes he's right, rather than because he's doing it purely for attention.
He drove me crazy with that, Rob, though. So I'm going to ask probably the dumbest question of the night. Isn't every moment on the record? I mean, the second he started and every annoying utterance, there's somebody in the back going typing into the transcript. So I'm thinking the record is the damn transcript.
The record is the transcript. The record is the pleadings. And the record is everything that takes place in that courtroom. Now, when you hear things saying, for the record, the defendant has raised his right hand and is pointing in the direction of this person, right? That's because it's all transcribed. Right now, the video recording or the footage from the day's events doesn't make it into the court record. The court record is the transcript. So there has to be some description of what's taking place in the in the
You're describing it for later. Yeah.
But yeah, the court reporter's sitting there typing away, and yeah. That's the record.
Well, that was making me crazy. That's why I was like, every time he said for the record, I was like, you're on the record. You're on the record, dummy. I mean, if they said, okay, I'm going to excuse the jury and we're taking this off the record or a sidebar, now we're not on the record. It's a sidebar, right?
But that's why I made the comment about the record in his mind, what the record is. The record is what the people see outside. He is speaking to the record. The record is the general population. He doesn't care what the judge thinks of him in that moment, as long as the people outside of the courthouse who are watching the things on the screen and can hear the audio get to hear his voice, because he believes he can sway them. He believes that they are going to believe, or that they're going to see the injustice that he's been subjected to in his mind, which goes to that Reddit post thing as well.
I'm going to tell you, Rob, what the record is.
Tell me what the record is, please. Tell me what the record is.
Before I do, I just want to make sure that what I'm about to say checks out with Dr. Daz. Would you say that delusions of grandeur could be consistent with paranoia?
Yeah, so delusions of grandeur are more commonly related to psychotic symptoms and specifically mania, right? So bipolar, as I'm sure you know, has periods of depression, and the opposite, mania, very typically have delusions of grandeur. I think he's 100% grandiose. Yeah, I don't know if he's got delusions of actual delusions of grandeur, because they tend to be a bit like I said before. They tend to be outside of reality. So for example,
hallucination of a life you don't lead.
Yeah, exactly. So I've seen patients who believe that they're the descendant of Christ, or that they can read minds, or that they can fly, that kind of thing. He's definitely, arrogant, up himself, narcissistic, grandiose, but I don't think he's got.
Okay, so what's the word then for a delusion of grandeur that isn't a delusion? Like someone who just thinks much higher of themselves. Would that just be grandiose?
Yeah, arrogance. Grandiose, egotistical, arrogance, narcissistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the record, Rob.
All good qualities.
The record is the eventual movie script.
Yeah, that he's gonna have.
Yeah, he just wants, like, eventually when they're gonna make movies about him and write novels about him, he just wants to make sure that all the facts are right.
Yeah,
that's what the record is, because like there's certain things he says in certain ways where it allows me to know that he thinks he's in some sort of crime movie. Like he sets things up in a certain way where we're about to get to the plot twist as opposed to just asking the question, and he's being over dramatic at times. So I think every time he says the record, it's like, I just want to make sure down the line when they make a movie about this that the facts are right. Because in his head, it's grandiose attitude, or just this bigger perception of himself as being more important and more impressive than he actually is, which from what I've studied is more in line with, they call not covert narcissist, but what's the other word for it? Vulnerable narcissism, Dr. Daz, which I've dealt with a lot of vulnerable narcissists. And it's kind of like they have this thing to where they feel like they're owed more than they actually get.
Yeah.
And
Entitlement. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'm not diagnosing narcissism as a disorder, but more as maybe part of this paranoia or behavior. But I see that kind of like, I'm entitled to more things than what I have attitude. And I think a part of them is like, this record is like the movie script.
You know, it would be very curious. An experiment would be to propose or get an interview with him and propose names of people that would play him in an eventual movie, and choose insulting names and see how he reacts. Because
Spidey, you just said that, and that just really bums me out. But I was talking to Kurt last night on Uncivil Law, and he was pointing out, God, everything you said is right. It's driving me nuts, because he was pointing out that this case is absolutely, in terms of the law, boring, pedestrian. It's as close to a slam dunk as anything you've ever seen.
Yeah.
That was my words, a slam dunk. But there is nothing interesting at all to cover in this case except for his attitude and behavior in the courtroom. So yes, Spidey, he turned it into a freaking movie.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
I hate that.
Something that, like you said, is a slam dunk, because I'm sure Rob and Alita, if we just gave them the facts, like laid out the facts, here's what the guy did, here's his defense, here's what's going on, they'd be like, what is there to look at here?
There's nothing.
There's nothing. But
he made it I hate that though, because I hate the fact that he sat there and grandstand, and I want to get to Super Chats too, over these weeks, putting this community through even more torture, this community that lost 6 lives, so many injured, right in the middle of a parade. This parade is the community getting together to celebrate themselves, to celebrate life, celebrate everything that they are. And he literally stabbed right through the heart of it. And then the son of a bitch is taking this moment to enjoy and flagrantly go around and make it all about him again, rubbing their noses in it. It just infuriates me.
Even just the people who weren't injured but who were there and have been traumatized from the event. Like how many, like I remember talking about this when they played in the closing argument. They played one of the clips before they played the clip with him mowing people down. It was one of just like, this is the vibe of what it looked like, you know, what people were there for. And they played Jingle Bell Rock. And I remember saying like, oh my God, how many people are going to be ruined for Jingle Bell Rock now?
Well, it's like a movie. You're literally watching a movie, right? You get the slow roll into the movie. Jingle Bell, everybody's dancing. Oh my God. It's
like, it felt like that's a tactic in a horror movie, right? Like when all, like you feel like everything should be very ominous and serious, but like somehow there's something like sickly sweet and endearing that's being played, and you feel like something is about to happen that's horrible. It was the same sort of presentation.
Yep.
So I have to ask Rob, who do you think is the most insulting actor that we can suggest to play Darrell Brooks?
Well, Gary Coleman's dead.
I don't know. Was just someone who's already just
Danny DeVito?
Shane. Yeah. You know what? Take away, propose someone of a different race and a different sex to play that role. No, propose that it's a female. Say we're going to rewrite the script. It's going to be a female.
For sure.
A white female, he'll lose it.
A white female, he would lose his
and her name is Karen.
Mind.
No. That would be perfect. Okay, let me go through some of these.
I think if we told him that the judge was cast to play him in the movie, his head would just explode. Like,
yeah.
He definitely didn't like that.
Because she was there.
K-Rab, in my opinion, he really thought the jury would nullify. Is that delusional? Yes, but he also thought it would be a good idea to represent himself.
Okay, I want to take this really quick.
Yeah.
Rob and I talked about this quite a bit. Also, Eric, I'm going to do my usual self-promotion here. Rob and I have a lab analysis that was a ton of fun. It's going to be split. I'm editing it today after this. It's going to be split on both our channels. It's coming out tomorrow. Went into a lot of detail on some of the behaviors. Rob had some amazing stuff to say, both legally and about the behaviors. But there's one thing I want to talk about. When the verdict was read and when the jury members had to, Rob or Alita, what do you call it when they each had to get up and when they polled the jury?
When they poll the jury.
Yeah.
If you look at his expression, it wasn't what I would have expected. There was no surprise. There was no anger. There was no like, how dare you? Which you would expect if he legitimately in his brain thought
That's true.
He's innocent. He did nothing wrong. There would be this shock, this surprise. Now, there's two ways to look at that. One is he knows the system is against him, so he still thinks he's right, but they're part of the system, so he's not surprised that this happened. But then there's still a part of me going, if he was really that delusional and thought he was making good points, I would have wanted or expected to see a little more surprise or confusion in his face. So it's just to me interesting to note that if he was that lost in delusion, we would have seen some sort of like looking at them like, oh, really? Like, seriously? That's what you guys think? Like, even if it's just like surprised that they have the guts to do something like this, given that he's clearly innocent. So to me, the fact that there was no reaction, that's still a part of me going, I think a part of him knows that he really did something that merits this kind of sentence.
Well, it's like that when he told the judge, I'd like, should a guilty verdict come in? And yeah, go ahead, Ali.
Part of it.
I was going to say, I actually, funny enough, I pulled my chat for when we were waiting for the verdict. I pulled the chat to say, do you think that he's going to be emotional or stoic when the verdict comes in? 75% of the viewers said emotional. I mean, everyone was just absolutely shocked. I mean, how could you not be, right? Because given the behavior that he had throughout the trial. So I think that's a really good point, Whitey.
And go one step further. When the judge is done polling the jury, the judge has to ask both sides if they're satisfied with the poll. And prosecution says yes, and she asks Brooks, and Brooks does this subtle I object. It was one of the quietest things he's ever done during the entire trial, where he just says I object. There was no histrionics, there was no big explosion when you thought that the judge gave him the chance. Do you object to the poll? And he goes, I object. And that was it. It was done. I was shocked.
And someone in the chat is saying he gave them a death stare. Agreed. I know he did. I would have expected that, but I would have expected on top of that shock, surprise, sort of like what anytime he felt there was injustice happening throughout this case, he got hysterical. We saw that chin flying forward. We saw these gestures like this with the one side of the lip going no like this. It's just showing that contempt leaking through a lot. In this moment, there was none of that. Yes, there was like this cold stare, but I'm just saying, I agree with what Alita said, or what her viewer said. I would have expected to see some sort of.
Oh, I voted in that poll. I said emotional. I mean, no, I totally did. It was like every single one. Every time I checked in, he was being an ass. Every time. So what do you expect? Well, it's the biggest part of it, so he's going to be the biggest ass. And no, it was like he moved on. Okay, so let me get that. He wanted to have control if he chose his fate. In my personal experience, people like him have a disconnect that takes them back and forth in behavior and thought process. That makes sense.
Go back to that. We need Dr. Dawes' opinion on that.
Okay, so people have disconnect, takes them back and forth in behavior thought processes. Yeah, I mean, definitely. So what you can have people, if somebody's got like a psychotic illness where they have actual sort of very bizarre delusions, they can certainly vary over time, right? They don't tend to vary between minutes, but certainly over hours and days. For him, I would say that he seems so fully invested in his victimization and of his perception of there being injustice against him that I wouldn't have expected that to waver, which just brings us back to the previous point. Why did he not react more emotionally? I'm not sure I fully have an answer for that, really. It surprises me as well. Maybe his delusional beliefs were so his delusional thoughts were so marked and so deep that I think Spidey said this before, that he wanted the jury to be on his side, but if they weren't on his side, he automatically assumed that they were part of the problem and they were part of the system and they were part of the conspiracy. So maybe that's why he didn't react, because he thought, well, fucking typical. Of course they're not going to be on my side. They're just going, they're deciding with the judge.
Yeah.
All right. You can't apply logic. Rob is right. He's guys a soft sit. There's some back and forth on this, so I'm going to go through multiple here. Good question here. Oppositional defiant disorder. Dr. Dawes.
Yeah. I suppose at a stretch you could say that some of his behavior indicates this. That is usually that particular disorder, it occurs in children. The adult version is conduct disorder, and it's just what it sounds like basically when somebody behaves in a kind of childish and difficult manner. They're usually anti-authoritarian, but it's not for somebody to have this disorder, and it's kind of a version of a personality disorder. It has to be kind of across all of their life constantly. So they're getting in trouble with the police all the time, which I suppose this guy was. They don't respect authority in any kind of way. So yeah, I suppose that's actually quite fair that he does have some features of conduct disorder. Yeah.
Okay, well, this leads perfectly into the next one. His mother said in an interview that he has bipolar and personality disorder, and she was angry the judge let him represent himself because of it.
Judge didn't have a choice.
Got it right. He's got it right.
Like I saw that interview. I'm going to take a look at it again, but the judge didn't have a choice based on his conduct and demeanor. Even the standby counsel thing, he had the right.
And my understanding is he was not found incompetent to stand trial, right? So
correct. That is the incompetent to stand trial is a remarkably high burden. Basically, you have to prove that the level of affect on his brain is such that he had no capability of comprehending the right or wrong of what he was doing in that moment, and could not therefore stand trial for that at that point in time until he, was later adjudicated to be competent to understand the process that he's in. That's a different burden than being competent to represent yourself. And then look at how he handled himself. Now, I mentioned this with Spidey earlier. One of the things the judge did, and Emily picked up on it, a bunch of people picked up on it, was the second the judge would say a legal buzzword, whether that was subject matter jurisdiction, or I've given you my finding and ruling, or I think at some point she said estoppel. Within one sentence or 1 hour, all of a sudden you hear that buzzword coming back. Now it's out of context, but it demonstrated that he was at least engaged enough to realize and comprehend what was being said, digest it, turn it into a way that he can use it in his own case. That's about as good a proof as you need that he was competent to represent himself.
He was pulling from case law at various times. I mean, and showing like he was incorrect in his analysis, but he was showing that he knew where to go to look for support for arguments, and
they
he
were
actually,
at least relevant.
he had a coherent sort of argument in a lot of cases, pulling from that case law.
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys in this panel know this, but for the viewers, having a diagnosis of mental illness or a personality disorder isn't enough. You have to go through a specific kind of assessment to see whether you have an understanding of the legal process. In the UK, we call it fitness to plead. You guys obviously call it something different in different states, don't you? But so in answer to that question from Jess Rubery, that no matter what his mother thinks is not about the diagnosis, it's about the level of his cognitive ability with those diagnoses.
Seems to me like this belief that they know how the law works and they get to get things their way is hereditary.
Maybe. Ashley,
imagine the mom in court, like, Your Honor, I want it on the record that my son should not be representing himself. For the record.
Well, notice the mom didn't show up.
Well, his mother enabled him. I think a lot of people are saying, and it's definitely possible, if he's never been corrected in any way of any type, that could be problematic. Yeah. Ashley wants you to cover the Ted Bundy trial. Alita.
Got to get through Menendez first, but it's definitely on the list of ones I want to do.
Before you move on to the next super chat, and sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, Alita. Yes, Menendez is on their list. Check it out. Every Monday she does Menendez coverage. It's awesome. I jump in there. It's fun. And then she'll throw the other one on there. But the one comment I wanted to make about the mom before we moved on, I really do feel for her, like very, very much. There is very little that has to be more difficult for a mom than watching their child engage in behavior and just go down that path. So she's living through her own hell right now, as are all the other victims of this. And sorry.
No, I agree.
All right. Didn't she say that she wasn't going to be watching the trial? Like at all? That seems very cold to me.
Maybe there's only so much of the guy you can tolerate, no matter what his relation. I mean, no offense.
Just like their problem now.
To her point, also, could you watch if he was your son? Could you watch your son engage in that type of behavior? Could you actually stomach it?
No, because it's probably something she's seen her whole life and kind of wondered how to deal with it. and she never thought to
fair.
herself that it would lead to this. So yeah, I do empathize with her. So I'm making jokes. Like
That's fair.
it's my coping mechanism, and I apologize. Dr. Dawes could probably diagnose why I do this, but
Personality disorder.
damn it.
No, we don't have time, Spidey. We got to get through super chats. Your
Right.
diagnosis would take too much show. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but I think her whole life, Rob, she's had to deal with this, and she was probably
Yeah,
like one of those
that's
moms
fair.
who was like, "Oh, I don't know what to do with him. He's always like this." And now, next thing you know, he's on trial for having killed 6 people, and you're going, when did it go from just being a troubled kid to this? And you don't. I would imagine she has no idea what to do with herself.
Spidey, like the chat is saying, and I think it's proven true, she was afraid of him. He liked to beat up women. That he had a pattern of it. He especially liked to beat on his girlfriend who had the child.
Good point.
He really wanted to go to town on the judge, showed every bit of that. And that was probably the most painful part of his trial, was that the judge was a female. That every part of it appeared like it was just eating him alive.
And the
with
lead
it.
prosecutor too.
Oh, yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Good
And
point.
and that they were both visibly and obviously smarter than him.
True. And didn't think much of
Yeah.
him.
Mhm.
Okay, Pokey ESD. He's not a true soft sit. He didn't go soft sit until he was in jail for a while. He was converted. That makes sense because, like Kurt was saying, some of his soft sit stuff didn't line up. Like he wouldn't have
Correct.
said driving, he would have said traveling.
Yep. He wasn't, or yeah.
He would have said what? What? He would have said what instead of what?
Traveling across the land.
Instead
He's
of
traveling.
driving.
These buzzwords are so
It's a specific thing. I mean, I don't know.
the whole like I refuse to say I understand because it means that I'm admitting that I stand under the law or something like that.
There's a
Why
lot.
can't you say
These guys are
driving?
confusing.
Why can't you say driving?
Well, no, you say that you're traveling because if you are a traveler, it's laws of admiralty. Honestly, Law Talk with Mike and Natalie are probably the best to explain it because they've covered so much of the sovereign citizen stuff. A lot of what he said
Apparently
just
it was the
didn't
eagle
line
on the
up.
flag that made him say the admiralty as well. But anyway, Spidey, that's a whole nother.
Okay.
I plan to get a sovereign citizen expert to
Go.
try to decode.
I thought you were gonna say you were gonna have a sovereign citizen on your channel.
Oh, don't do
I don't
that.
know. I don't know if I could find a sane one. Anyway, equality. Good. I like that. Equality. Nice. His face is very punchable. Disrespectful to me. That's rich coming from someone who's been disrespectful, to everybody the whole time. Do we think the jury got fed up with him with the supermod secret McSquirrel? Yes, I think the jury by that point, in my opinion, of course, I didn't see their faces and all that, so I'm projecting, was saying, "Come on, just rest. Come on, just rest. Everybody, rest your case. Get your closing done. Give me 10 minutes." I would argue they went back in that room, and the only time they took was to fill out the paperwork.
76 pages, 76 counts. That's fair. Yeah.
What was it, an hour and 45 minutes?
Yeah, that's about right. Like,
Okay,
honestly,
it's like, anybody have any problems? Guilty? All around? Oh, you're good? You're good?
Paperwork.
Guilty? All right, here. How do you do this? Now, where's the form over here, Bill? I mean, come on.
Isn't
No,
there
the
like
deal-
a yes, guilty, apply to all?
They don't have that. And that's the
No.
thing. Just like she had to read.
Unfortunately not.
You know what? I was on with Alita at the time, and that was part of the really sad part of this case is we're sitting there having a side conversation because the judge is having to read every charge against this guy. And every charge is somebody's life. It's a real person. And we're like, this is going on forever. So what are we doing this afternoon? And then I start to feel just like an absolute pile of dog shit, being bored because people's lives are just cutting into my day with this droll talk. And
because he took
that's
so many of
disturbing.
them, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean-
Eric, I totally relate. As I was editing the video of Rob and I, there were parts of me where we're laughing and joking, and I was like, when I thought about what is actually happening here and what we're looking at, it mortified me because sometimes with what we do, we forget, because we're looking at this case, at this trial, at this guy, forgetting that this isn't all there is. There's a reason he's here, and that reason is mortifying. People lost their lives, and that's something that for me is no, I can't deal with that kind of thought very easily. So yeah, I definitely relate to what you just said, Eric. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry if there's times where I made light of this. I can't imagine what those families are going through.
I think the thing is,
sometimes it's also a bit of a sort of a psychological escape mechanism, right? Because sometimes when things are so heavy and so dark, sometimes it's like you have to afford yourself a little bit of levity just so that the weight doesn't bring you down so low.
I'm not going to ask Dr. Doss about the break rooms.
Just a release the stress, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
What we're talking about.
Exactly.
A gallows humor, right? I mean, it kind of is in that regard. And okay, Dr. Doss, not to get too specific, you and your colleagues, are some of the conversations on the side kind of dark?
Oh, between me and my colleagues, right?
Or your colleagues you overhear? Obviously, you would never say anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a difference between laughing at or recognizing the ridiculousness of a situation or a case that you're dealing with, especially if there's quite horrific kind of violence. There's a difference between laughing at that and laughing at a victim, which we'd never do, right? You can kind of laugh at a perpetrator, laugh at a situation, but never at the actual victim. So yeah.
Fair enough. And I still have a ton of super chats. So
good problem to have.
No, thank you. I mean, seriously, thank you. By the book, question for Dr. Doss, though. If he was truly paranoid, then he wouldn't have been able to switch it off in the end like he did.
I would respectfully argue that I don't think he did switch it off. I don't think he switched the paranoia off. He might have curtailed his own response to it. And that could just be because he didn't want anyone to have the satisfaction of what he perceived to be the injustice. So that might be why he didn't have that much of an emotional response.
Or you could argue embarrassment.
Yeah, absolutely. But I am quite convinced that he's paranoid the entire way through. He just didn't necessarily express it all the time.
You can also argue that to us, it's such a conclusive moment, right? It's the end of the fight. But in his head, it's just another step in this long fight against the system.
That's
so
true.
It's not this conclusive decision. It's just another stepping stone in what has already been his life up to now in his fight against this system. So maybe it doesn't merit that conclusive reaction we're looking for because to him, it's not even a conclusion.
Yeah, because he's going to appeal. Then when he loses that, and maybe even before that point, he's going to start filing civil cases against the state for all kinds of reasons. So one after another, try to get these nuisance settlements to try to take a piece out of the government. These are things that are going to be happening for him.
All right. Supper Man. Thanks. This is therapeutic for me. We who wanted to punch him the whole time. It is for me too. I mean, it's depressing, but thank you. And Georgina, thank you so much. Struggling with notifications, so I'm late, but you want to offer support. Georgina is one of my greatest supporters. She's amazing. And I agree. I can't believe how patient the judge was with him. Can't stand what he did. And I'm not sure I could have been that patient. Thank you for all your knowledge. That's the thing. I actually was arguing with my chat last Saturday night about that because they're like, no, all the lawyers are saying, stop it, drop it. This is enough. It's enough. And I was like, I don't know. And is this a case of like Richards that, that she's of this community and the community may be like Minnesota nice. Maybe it's Wisconsin nice. And she gave every opportunity so it could never, ever, ever, ever get overturned in an appeal of any way.
That's the thing that I think she was most concerned with is that if she's going to err on the side of giving him too much space, then not enough. Because then he can't come back and say, I didn't have an opportunity to testify. I didn't have an opportunity to cross-examine so-and-so. I didn't have an opportunity to do a closing argument because, he had multiple opportunities to come back into the courtroom. She sent him back out, said, you can come back. You can give it. I'll give you another try. And then he immediately gets right back to it. She says, okay, you're going back out again. But it's as frustrating as it is to go through all of that. Now that we're on the back end of that whole experience, there's zero question that she gave him absolutely every possible opportunity to redeem himself. And she put it all on the record very, very clearly every single time. So when it does eventually go up on appeal, there's no question. There's zero question. So she just solidified that through that whole experience. I know it was very frustrating and people were at times getting pissed at her for it, but I I think that it probably was the right way to do things.
And
That
I think
was my
another,
stance.
I just wanted to add to that, Alita completely agreed with everything you've said, but another element is the fact that it is such a renowned and highly publicized trial, right? So it's going to be observed by so many people compared to your average trial. So she kind of has to do everything, err on the side of caution and do everything by the book.
Yes.
You know, Alita, it makes me think, I was in the Army once and I had a saying that, like, going into PLDC, which is like another kind of training or whatever, it's like, I could stand in a bucket of shit for a month. And to me, that was kind of what she was doing. Like,
yes,
I can tolerate this bullshit for 2 or 3 weeks. I can get through it just so I never have to hear that son of a bitch's name for the rest of my life, or have him ever cross my path, or have any part of anything I did questioned. I can stand in a bucket of shit for a month. So
yeah,
imagine
a remand. Yeah, imagine a remand back to her courtroom.
Another phrase that I love that's very similar is embrace the suck. And that's exactly what she did, was just embrace the suck, because it sucks right now. It absolutely sucks, but this is temporary. And if I do my job right, no one will have to deal with this again.
Wow.
At least with this guy.
Yeah.
And agree.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what that currency is. That's kind of cool. But yes, I do think he was trying to prolong the trial as long as possible. And
that's 10,000 Wonder Womans.
Wonder Woman. Okay.
10,000 Wonder Womans.
Awesome. That's good currency. Thank you, K-Rob. This is very nice. Sobson believe are something that a lot of gullible people buy into, mostly to get themselves out of traffic citations. Yeah, all the videos on YouTube seem to be some sort of traffic argument or whatever. That makes them foolish, not mentally ill. The difference with Brooks is he's foolish enough to think it works for murder. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Thank you. He isn't a lawyer, may not know what the record means. Yeah, I think we all agree on that he has a different view of what the record is, and he has a lot of different views about everything, so that makes sense. Dr. Das, cluster B?
So there's different types of personality disorders, and cluster B typically tend to be things like antisocial and borderline. So yeah, I suppose he does have elements of cluster B because he's definitely antisocial. So yeah, good diagnosis. I concur.
All right. I can't hear this old Barstool without thinking of Vegas. Sometimes super chats fall out of context, I guess, when I wait till later.
This old Barstool.
Sorry, Spidey, but he gave the jurors a death stare when they were polled. Okay. And yeah, we talked about that. Brooks is always well behaved in front of the jury. Always. Mm-hmm. No, that might be. I didn't catch it. A lot of the stuff.
There were exceptions. There were exceptions.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were quite a few exceptions.
Curiously, constantly thinking he was being held in contempt. Is that an indication of his lack of understanding of what contempt of court is, or confession by projection because he had personal contempt of the court? I like that.
No, it was basically he was trying to get on the record that the judge was punishing him for his behavior that he believed was appropriate. Contempt is something that is a form of punishment, whether it's civil or criminal. And he was also trying to get the judge to play on his level and say, is it civil or criminal? No, the judge doesn't have to play your game, but that's what he was trying to do, to bring her down, to play this back and forth game, to get the dialogue going. Oh, he just was.
Is that part of the issue with the judge, is that she wasn't playing his game, but she also was trying to be as civil as possible. So instead of just saying, you're wrong, shut up, sit down, she's trying to explain the law to him. No, the law is this and da-da-da. And he really didn't care to learn the law. I'm curious.
Well, it wasn't really that. The judge was explaining the law, not for him, but so that there was a finding on the record. And I mean the real record, the one that's typed down, that record.
The actual record.
Explaining the law and explaining the basis for the judge's decision on the record.
Her lawful laws?
The judge cannot explain the law to him. The judge can't tell him what the law is or allows him to do or not do. That's giving him advice. So the judge has to skirt this line of talking to the transcript and not to him. The problem is, by doing that, it looked like it had engaged. It gave him the ability to come back. That's what he did the entire time. He would ask for a response by his behavior. He would go and do something outrageous to try and get a response that allowed for you to come down to his level and go in that back and forth exchange where he felt like he could win.
Yeah. And to Alita's point, she never did. Like we saw sometimes in like her cadence that she was losing patience in like that kind of spitting tone, but she was like explaining everything and just saying like, just because you think it's this, and
she has to be a mother. All I can say is that she has to be a mother
of teens.
Something. I mean, I totally agree. Wonder Woman. What baffled me is he brought as defense witnesses people who were actually hurt in the parade. Was he not aware? Why would he do that? Yeah, he called his own witnesses and they wanted to kick his ass. It's just a weird scenario. Question.
Yeah, what's that about? What I don't have an explanation for that. Like what? I don't know.
It was his gotcha moment. He wanted the identification. He called witnesses to basically get them to admit that they couldn't physically see him in the car. The problem was he was too stupid to realize that by even putting them up on the stand, he's opened the door to a lot more testimony. So just walked right on down there. And then he wanted to argue that people hadn't filed a claim, therefore they weren't the plaintiffs, therefore the state didn't have a right to bring the action. I mean,
yeah.
What was hilarious, though, is he got pissed off, though, because the prosecution said no questions. And he was like, what are you talking? And so he was like, that the prosecution coached his own witness that he called because they didn't ask any questions, rather than the realization that, no, you're so stupid that they're going to go ahead.
To cross-examine.
Yeah, they will let you fall and screw yourself over. It's like, why stand in the way of somebody destroying themselves? And that perfect on the next one. He has two reactions: implosion or explosion. Yeah.
I mean, it seems more explosion than anything, doesn't it? He wasn't.
Yeah.
He was a little bit quiet towards the end, but he was hostile and explosive
right at the end. It all came collapsing.
Good point.
Like a souffle.
Because you need a driver's license to drive.
Oh, got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much, Andy McLaughlin. ODD kids are incredibly frustrating and aggravating, and now he can't hurt her. She can choose not to testify for him.
Okay, fair.
And isn't it hilarious how when it came up, he was so cocky about her being there if he wants her there? Do you guys all remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Like, ain't no
She'll testify if I want her to.
She's gonna be here if I want her to be here. And then the judge would talk about something else, and he would go back to it and be like, "You ain't even got to worry about that." All I got to say, it's like he just kept reiterating that all he has to do is at a pin drop, she's going to show up there for him. And I feel like maybe her not showing up was her going, enough. Like, I'm done being scared of you.
She's probably like, thank God.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm just thinking like his girlfriend. She almost 30 now, so she's been with him for well over a decade, being beaten all the time.
Half her life.
God only knows what went on with his mother. There might have been a father in the picture because sometimes these things run in patterns. Maybe the mother's just like, finally, oh my God, I've got this, a monster out of the life.
Yeah.
There's a study that's been buried that found people like him start before age 12 with their mom and siblings. I'm guessing what I was just talking about. How many no bail offenders are Darrell Brooks's? I'm afraid there's a lot more than we might realize. Okay, well, I think that's somebody talking about the whole bail reform issue is like an entire another episode that I can see both sides of it for sure, because
you can't make law based on the worst offenders.
Also, a lot of the problem with the bail is sometimes you're turning people into more of a criminal because they're locked up now, so they lose their job, they can't pay the bills of the family, then they go home and beat their wife when they get out. I mean, sometimes you can exacerbate things by doing that. So again, there's both sides of it. And if somebody's a nightmare, obviously, there should be a defense attorney on this panel to balance out. Just saying, love y'all. Well, I'm a jury member.
I mean, Sarah, I'm domestic relations litigation. I represent both people accused of committing acts of violence and people that are victims of acts of violence. I'm by no means am I a favorable to a prosecution kind of attorney. I generally don't favor or like their behaviors. This is the one exception, I think.
how do you?
Let's talk
do
about
that
Binger.
Don't do that. Don't re-traumatize me.
Just to talk about prosecutors we don't like.
Oh, another case. Rob, how do you deal with that? Because I know you're a really empathetic person. Are you defending people accused of doing the crime and you know that they probably did do it?
I don't see them in the criminal context mostly. Most of the cases that I have are in civil where it's a protective order. And what I'm trying to do at that point in time is make sure the protective order is not overly restrictive. There's a habit that judges like when they're reviewing these things, that they just rubber stamp a protective order that has all the conditions and terms, and actually sometimes justified, sometimes not. But sometimes it can ruin people's lives, like their entire rest of their life, just a protective order that's over expansive. It's not easy, but people deserve to have an attorney represent them through the system. They don't understand what's going on. Mr. Brooks, if he was not dumb enough to if he just got out of his own way, he would have benefited from an attorney at the very least in.
What, he would have had 300 years instead of 900?
No, it's preserving a little bit of dignity.
Oh, okay.
And honestly, it's preserving a little bit of his livelihood in prison. You made the comment about people in jail getting opportunities to see some of this trial. If anyone has seen some of this trial, I imagine there are people in jail that don't think too kindly about Mr. Brooks.
Oh, well, yes, he's probably better off going to prison as soon as possible, because there are people in jail with him who are in that community, who potentially were affected directly in that community, a relative or a friend or somebody else in that parade. So good point.
I mean, he mowed down over 60 people. All of those people have families
and friends.
And friends. It's a small town, right?
This is a great question. It's going to open a can of worms. Can you explain his psychosis while traveling down the parade route and snapping out of it after he parked the car? Did he black out? What happened in that instance? Was it just a rage or what?
I'm afraid I don't know that much about this. I've only seen clips of the actual trial itself. So, Spidey, can you take this?
No, I wouldn't be comfortable diagnosing anything on that. It was chaotic. There wasn't enough to no.
There's not enough evidence. No one saw it. People saw him leave the scene in the vehicle, and people saw him drive through, but there's no one that was in the vehicle. No one has audio recordings of what took place. It would be pure speculation.
Yeah, there isn't anything that I can look at that would allow me with any confidence to know if there was a change of state or if he was sound-minded or nothing.
Well, there is. You can see some certain actions with overhead video. I can't show it on YouTube because of obviously scenario, but I will say if you watch the video, just to loosely describe it, he was going down. Okay, you have a parade and people are going, and he's driving into people. People go to the right. He traveled to the right and tracked people. And if I've been in the military, let's just say he was maximizing the casualties through his actions. So I think that you could draw maybe some conclusions from it, but you guys haven't seen it, so I'm not going to ask you.
No, but the question is specifically about after that, like snapping out of it as though he had blacked out while doing that, like he wasn't the one who was in control. Yeah. I haven't seen anything that would allow me to in any way comment on his mental state in that moment or after that moment.
Well, I'm going to go to Dr. Dawson. Does that
possible?
Be a likely scenario with this, or would it be just part of his behavior?
Okay, so from what I do know, which is basically what you just described to me, Eric, I would say that his behavior definitely seems goal-directed and sort of driven and purposeful, right, as opposed to completely random or inexplicable. So generally speaking, when somebody is extremely psychotic, they don't have goal-directed behavior. They don't really understand what they're doing. They're not in control of their actions. That's the one thing I'd say. Number two is that true psychosis is possible, but it's very, very rare for it to suddenly appear out of the blue and then suddenly disappear. It's kind of always there in the background. You have like relapses and remissions. And we know that he's not psychotic during the actual trial. You know, he's paranoid and he's got a personality disorder and he's got some very fixed beliefs, but he's not talking about hearing voices. He's not talking about these bizarre delusions that are out of touch of reality. So I guess what I'm saying is if he's not psychotic now, there's no reason why he should have been psychotic then. So I think I can't 100% say it didn't happen, but I think it's extremely unlikely that he was psychotic.
Well, watching his behavior in the courtroom with his inability to interact in a reasonable manner and to be explosive in that manner, I have very little trouble thinking of him leaving a fight and seeing people in his way and just saying, get out of my way. And maybe I'm wrong, and I could be projecting, but do you see through his repeated behavior over and over and over and over, just in the courtroom when he's obviously very tightly supervised, could you envision that person doing that incident?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, people who have generally hostile and angry and impulsive, aggressive personalities will act that way in lots of different scenarios and situations. So if he can lose his temper in a courtroom, then it's very feasible he'd lose his temper in that scenario as well. Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, that was I feel the worst reason. Steve from Southern Law talked about that often when you see a defense, a defendant sitting at a table, they're dressed nicely, they're toned down, everything. You're like, I just can't imagine anybody doing that. With him representing himself and acting as he did, everybody in the courtroom, and I think the jury had no trouble at all saying, yeah, that son of a bitch did it.
That's a big problem. Totally that's a big problem that I had with this. Not a problem, but something that to me was like, why this is a really bad look. And I'm not commenting this as someone who understands the law the way Alita and Rob do, but it's one thing when your client has done a monstrous thing, and as a lawyer, you're presenting evidence to try to make it seem like it's not that bad because you go, it's not the person. But when he himself is the one who's like questioning these witnesses and trying to present a narrative that it's not as bad as they're making it seem, that I guess for lack of better terms, that psychological distancing, because Eric, usually it's psychological, usually psychological distancing is this way. But I'm talking about in this case, like putting distance closer together. So psychological approaching, I guess, because now it's the guy who did it who's asking these questions who make it seem like he's trying to defend himself, as opposed to if it was a lawyer doing it and you saw him sitting there and kind of just, being sad or being closed up, there would be maybe some sort of like, okay, there's remorse here.
Maybe he didn't. Yeah, or maybe something did happen when he was talking about the recall. Is it possible that vehicle, did lose control? Because the lawyer would be saying there was a recall and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And the lawyer would never directly say, they couldn't say, I didn't do it. But they could say, he very well didn't do it, whatever. But having him do it, it's just like, no, it's like, yep, he did it. No problem seeing that at all. And I'm speaking as a jury member, by the way, not a lawyer. I'm saying if I was sitting on the jury and I saw that, I'd be like, oh yeah. Where do how long is it? Do we have to wait forever? Come on, get the forms in here. We got to get this done. Oh God, I don't have the box for it, but that was kind of funny in a really sad way. How he said in the other room.
No, that was just funny in a funny way. That's not even the sad part. Like that was just funny. He built a fort out of boxes on his
but
back.
he's like peering. What was it? Oh, and then the judge actually did say that, right? One time when she said, yes, Mr. Brooks is holding up a book. I believe it's a Bible. I noticed that he never has turned a page.
Never turned a page. I caught that too. When the judge said that, I was like, "You little shit!" Like, because she knew that was for the record, and that's like, all right, okay, he's done enough to you. That's fine.
Yeah.
Of course, I got to get her a little bit low. But yeah, when he peeked through it, oh my God! Didn't you take witnesses from a prosecution list people they chose not to call? I could be. I don't know his.
Which would make sense out of the paranoia part, because if it was paranoia, if he viewed that the prosecutor intentionally didn't call someone on their list, he would have thought they did that for a reason and there's something I can get.
They learned something about this person that made them not want to call them.
That makes so much sense. That's why you were saying the gotcha. He was like, I'm going to call all of them. There's something here.
There's something. There's a big conspiracy here.
Interesting. I never even thought about it. And then the prosecutor's like, okay, go ahead. Call them at your peril. That's a great point. Yes, and that's true. He stated his mother would obey him in terms of showing up.
Did he really use that word?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So to me, it just shows a few things that we've already mentioned in this episode. A huge degree of entitlement, that he's got this power and domination over his mother. We know that he was like that to his girlfriend. So basically just this misogyny. Those are all the character traits, and that would fit in with antisocial personality disorder, which we mentioned before, more than, for example, paranoid personality disorder.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Pokey SD meant the bail reform recipients, the revolving door. I mean, obviously, Darrell Brooks showed there's a problem in some cases, the bail system. Like, hint, if somebody jumped bail and you arrest them, maybe you shouldn't do a second bail. You know, maybe they are a risk for actually showing up to a jurisdiction. I don't know. It could be just me, but yeah. Let me see. He asked for the taser to be removed if he acted out. Zappo. Those guards, were like, please, come on. You won't tell if I pull this trigger. Yeah, you can't tell when he's standing up. Right as he's standing up, let's go. I mean, they just wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, I learned that I'm not telepathic because I was giving them every single mental cue. Please.
He was so bad that even if one of them stood up and went like this, and everybody said, the whole courtroom would be like, I didn't say anything. Mark Hudak, when he said his conscience is clear in closing, was that him attempting to exert control in the jury or situation, or is it a different psychological issue? Dr. Das.
Yeah, I mean, how can any normal person say their conscience is clear when they clearly have done something, openly so horrific? I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, how in his mind, he just minimizes what he's done and he feels victimized. And again, it goes back to that conspiracy we were talking about before, as if, nothing that he's done is wrong, external locus of control, everybody's against me. I don't think he's trying to trick the jury because it's not going to work, is it? You can't change everybody else's mind by saying that your conscience is clear. It's just too blunt an approach, I think.
Good point. Nah, he abuses victims all over again. Totally agree.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Totally agree. Find video of the mom. She's not coming to sentencing. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, would you want to speak on his behalf for leniency? Who wants to lean up the line and be like, do you have a second jail underground anyway? Worst part of me as a mother was the prosecution said people couldn't find their children for hours.
Yeah.
God.
That's terrifying.
And he was the one that elicited most of those questions.
Let me see. Per witnesses, DB stare matched what scared the judge. Okay. Yeah.
That's witnesses testified or witnesses spoke out afterwards when they gave interviews that the stare that they saw on screen or the stare they saw in court was the same stare that they saw on the face of the driver that came towards them. There was a bunch of statements that were given.
Oh, well, that would freak you out just a little bit. The deputies were like, please act up. Please act up. Please.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, oh, hell yeah. Rob, a few days ago, I sent a Twitter DM with a bit of his earlier violent stare that no one noticed. A question about his shifting.
Oh, I'll have to pull that.
Definitely. And okay, folks, that is all of the super chats. And thank you so much. It is extremely late for a couple of our guests that I don't want to, hold them up any further. And I know Spidey has the
apologize.
video.
I'm trying not to yawn. I don't want to be disrespectful, but it is a late hour for me, and I always want to come and be as lively as I possibly can. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, Spidey has a video that he's got to edit all night and
Robin High analysis, and that's gonna take me through the night. So I apologize to the viewers if it uploads like late tomorrow morning. It's not because I posted it late. It's because I'll still be editing tomorrow morning.
What he's trying to say is it's my fault.
No,
and everybody here is holding him. You guys are killing me. Okay, Georgine. He laughed so much, and his head was down during the verdict as an act completely. Perhaps. But everybody, thank you so much, Dr. Das.
yes,
Thank
this
you.
was so
Thank you
amazing.
so much for coming in here and.
Guys, it's been an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure to be among such esteemed company. I might be in touch with some of you to see if we can work
please.
on some of the
Dr.
videos
Nas,
together.
anytime.
Anytime. Yeah, you're
Like,
welcome.
I am
anytime.
welcoming you to Eric's channel anytime and my own channel anytime. Like, I'm
Same.
officially telling you, you're allowed to come on Eric's channel anytime you want.
Okay.
And same
You have
with-
that authority, I see.
Consider
Okay.
myself the bouncer of Eric's channel, so you're more than
The
welcome.
bouncer of my channel.
You're also on my channel, more than welcome anytime. I love the
Same.
insight you brought. I'm so thankful, Eric. Eric made us wait because we were supposed to do the thing last week, and I think there was some scheduling issues. I'm so glad you were here for this. Like, thank you for your time.
That's
Incredible.
very kind of you. I really appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
All right, last super chat, and we're going out. Equality with the awesome name. You have COVID now, feeling pretty crappy, but we help so much. Thank you, and thank you, Equality.
Have some equality. It'll make you feel much better.
Perfect.
Sounds awful.
Great.